This morning we are very privileged to have Dr. John Fromson from the Department of Psychiatry here at Mass General to speak to us. In 2010, Dr. Fromson was elected a Class A non-alcoholic trustee of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. He is also our sponsor for the weekend here at Mass General. Without Dr. Fromson, this weekend would not have been possible. Thank you, Dr. Fromson, for coming and for hosting us here this weekend at MGH.
Thanks so much, and really I have to thank all of you, for without you this meeting wouldn't be possible. I really did not have to do much, and really thank Arissa also, because she was very creative, very assertive in a healthy way, and it is really how can I say, in a kind, caring, warm, empathetic, diplomatic way, was able to bring us together. So I just thank you for that. It's very humbling for me to be here with you. I just admire so much, your experience, strength, and hope, and the recovery journey, and really it's an inspiration for me and really the highlight of my own professional life. I just want to be very respectful of the time here and not go into some soliloquy or diatribe about me. It's very awkward and embarrassing for me to be so self-referential and talk about me. It's very, very hard. But I know a lot of you do. What's really kind of cool is, though, in this role that somehow, I don't know how it happened, but I'm in right now as being your humble and obedient servant on the board. I've got a chance to go to meetings kind of like this around the country, and it's just so amazing that you can almost like have your eyes closed and be dropped down into an auditorium like this here, or in Iowa, or in Alberta, Canada, or in Long Beach, California, or in Dallas, Texas, and you're like all in the same place, and the camaraderie and the fellowship is just an incredibly warming and uplifting thing for me. And while I can't say that I've worked all the steps, I certainly very much ascribe to them and look to them as a really neat way for me to conduct my life, and I try to instill this upon my two children, who are 23 and 21, and also my wife. I kind of refer back to them as kind of a guidepost, because I really don't have much of a moral compass. You kind of grow up and go through training and stuff, and it's been a very great thing for me to be involved in this. Just very briefly, it's kind of interesting. I knew just in my professional training something about, of course, the steps. At least I was exposed to it and a little bit, and the traditions. But I didn't even know the concepts existed until I got into this role. So it's been quite an education experience for me. And what's kind of neat about this, I'm always learning so much from you as I take my own little journey through all this. But I'm always asked, how did you get involved in this? What kind of brought you to this? And I'll never forget, as a medical student, having one lecture about alcoholism, if you can believe it, one lecture, and it was during my second year. And there was a woman who was part of the fellowship, and she told her story, and I'll never forget that. I can't even tell you about who lectured before or after her or what, but I just visually remember her and how that moved me. And I kind of parked that in the back of my brain, I guess, for an awfully long time. And even during my psychiatric training, which was here in Boston, and I did a child training in psychiatry after that, we really had very, very little exposure to AA. It was just something that send your patients to AA, not really knowing really much about it or encourage them to be involved in that. So I got through training somehow, and I was married shortly after that, and my wife kind of brought me back into the real world and helped socialize me. And I was kind of like a card-carrying member of the Mass Medical Society. And I became a member just because I could get a free subscription to the New England Journal of Medicine. And I really wasn't involved at all, but I got this call one evening, and they said, we need a child psychiatrist to be part of this physician's health group. And I said, physician health what? And apparently there was this ad hoc group of physicians who would be gathering every month to help guide and monitor the recovery of other physicians that had drug and alcohol problems. And I said, why in God's name would you want someone like me? I'm primarily, at that point in my career, I was seeing kids and adolescents, and they said, well, a lot of these people that we help have families, and by the time they got to this committee, this ad hoc group of people that were trying to help them, they had lost just about everything. A lot of them had lost their families. A lot of them had lost a lot of their financial support. A lot of them had lost their homes, their ability to practice medicine, and their families were really in turmoil. And they felt they needed a child psychiatry person just to help, maybe, give them some advice about where the kids and the family members could get some sort of, emotional support, or if I could lend some sort of positive attributes to this group. And I said, sure. And lo and behold, it was probably a pivotal moment in my professional career. And I was involved in this committee. And the committee, believe it or not, even though it was very well intended, there were like 30 of us from very disparate groups in medicine. There were anesthesiologists there were pediatricians, there were people like myself, there were surgeons, allergists, radiologists. It was an amazing group. But although we were very well intended, there wasn't any real cohesion. We didn't have like any real standard operating procedures about how to deal with these docs. We just did it they did it from the goodness of their heart and just tried their best to help get them into treatment, steer them to caduceus meetings, and those are the meetings just for docs. AA meetings, which is kind of an interesting concept, I think. There's, I think, some very positive but some negative things about that. But they tried their best, but they were getting in trouble with the Board of Registration in Medicine. That's the group that licensed physicians, because they weren't reporting docs that relapsed to the board. And that was the agreement that the Board of Medicine had with this free-form committee of the medical side, that if you had a doc and you were monitoring them and they relapsed, you need to let us know, because our charge is to protect patients and be the vanguard for public safety. So this group wasn't doing that, and the board was really getting upset, and because they were finding out about people who relapsed from patients, saying, this physician had alcohol on his breath, and I saw him as a patient, and then the board would find out that we were monitoring him and that we didn't report him. So it got us into real trouble. And if you want to really scare the daylights out of a group of physicians, just tell them that if they don't do something right, the board was going to ask nurses or social workers to take over this role. So that got the medical society's attention like really, really quick. Like, for that would be unthinkable to have nurses or social workers take over the role of monitoring physicians that were on the recovery journey. So the medical society thought about setting up their own program instead of having this reform committee. And somehow, as strange things happened, I got the tap on the shoulder and asked, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this?" And I said, "Sure." And I left the inpatient and outpatient psychiatric work, and I became the director of this program. And I was able to get money from the malpractice carriers in the state, because they figured that, gee, if we could give like the rate that I use, and it just came off the top of my head, $25 for a physician that they insured. So let's say there's a big malpractice carrier in the state, and they insured like 1,000 physicians. I would say, give me $25 for every physician. So that would come to like $25,000 if they had 1,000 physicians. And with that, all the malpractice carriers started to contribute, because I couldn't prove it to them using data, which of course they like to see, but they were able to know that it was the right thing to do, and that if they could prevent one bad outcome and all the litigation, or all the literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, I was told it takes like $600,000 even before something goes to court for a malpractice case in terms of the litigation fees, that this would be something really, really good. So they bought into it, which was a great thing. And we became a 501c3 corporation, so we could accept charitable donations. And we really grew, and we had 5 physicians, as we do now, in various parts of the state as associate directors. I tried to make sure that all those physicians were in recovery, because I felt I wasn't, and how could I really relate to people like you? And I was probably the last person in the world they would want to hear about. It would be much more important to hear about people who went through the experience themselves, and that was a really, really cool thing. And the program has grown, and we've helped over 2,000 docs now in the state. There are about 24,000 licensed physicians, so we've helped about 2,000 of them. And it's been a model program for the rest of the country, and it's called Physicians Health Services, PHS. So just about every state now has a physician health program kind of modeled after the one that we were able to grow here in Massachusetts, and that's how I got involved. And in the same way that I got involved in that, I now am on the board of the directors of PHS, not involved in the operational aspects of it at all, but I'm here at MGH, and I do some research, and I also do some teaching of medical students. But right now, PHS has continued to grow, and I think the nursing groups here and the social work groups and the pharmacy people, they're using the physician health model as well in terms of developing a similar program for those groups. And I hope they're as successful as we have been. And similarly, as I got into the physician health thing, while I was here actually, I got a call from someone who knew me from New York State actually, and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being on the AA board?" And I said, "AA what?" Again, like, I didn't even know, again, I knew something about the steps. I thought they were really cool. I knew that there were traditions, but I had no idea. I thought this was AA. And in some ways, this is AA, really. I had no idea, though, that there was like an actual organization, an administrative group that actually helped you, carry out the mission and the steps of the fellowship. And that's how I got involved, and I've been on that board for about 2 years now, and it's been an incredible experience. I had a chance to go to San Antonio, which was probably the highlight of this thing for me. I mean, I just could not believe it, and I still find it hard to use words to describe what that experience was like. But I knew something was very unique when I got on the plane here to fly to San Antonio, because everybody was so nice. Everybody was smiling. Everybody was shaking each other's hands and giving hugs. I mean, it was just like this love fest going on this plane. I thought, well, wow, this is really, and then it dawned upon me, we're all going to the same place. And this is like a unique group of people. So I knew this is going to be a special event, but I had no idea how special it was going to be. And, I was taking a bus from the hotel over to that big place where the 50,000 or 55,000 of you gathered, and I was next to a guy who was carrying the flag from Saipan. I never even, you hear like Saipan, I thought that was like something in the movies, I didn't know idea where that was. So that was just an incredible experience. And I'm just so impressed with the commitment and the passion and the energy that all of you bring to AA. The work that we do administratively is very committee-driven, and that's something I learned too. You're assigned a committee, and I'm on the committee for, not surprisingly, interaction with the professional community. That kind of makes sense. They also assigned me to the correctional committee. I had done a little bit of work here at MCI Framingham. Some focus groups for the women there, because basically MCI Framingham is if you can believe it, is like a huge psychiatric hospital. Probably like 80% of people have what we would call thanks. Wow, that's AA. That would never happen anywhere else but AA. So thank you. they have what we would call a psychoactive substance use disorder, some sort of addiction, whether it be alcoholism or just something else. And so many of them have a psychiatric diagnosis. And so many of these women that I met in these groups would say the reason why we're here is because there's no treatment out there. Thanks again for this. So I don't know. That was kind of an amazing experience, and I think somehow the people in AA always seem to know stuff about you that you don't think anybody does. So I think that's how I got on this correctional group. And the other committee is this international committee. Those of you who are on the recovery journey get a chance to travel to very far away places, whether it be South America or South Asia or Russia and Eastern Europe, to try to help those organizations develop similarly as successful as AA has been here. And we hear about those trips, and we try to develop some objective criteria and ways about trying to figure out when trips should be made and when they shouldn't, because obviously it costs a lot of money, and sometimes the requests are more towards celebrating things like an anniversary or something, as opposed to actually administratively trying to help. And we go through these machinations and long discussions about whether or not one of you should be going on these trips. So people there are very, I wouldn't say they're tightwad or penurious or frugal, but they're very careful about how the money is spent, which I think is really, really cool. And I was telling Arista that the conference, the General Service Conference, is coming up the last week of April. And I will be so proud to be able to bring the schedule with me of what you've done here as a nice, example of what a group can do. So I just thank you so much, and it's such an honor for me to be here. I can't believe that I just still can't believe that you would invite somebody like me to be to spend some time here. So thank you. And if there are any questions or comments you'd like to make, I have a minute or two here with you if you'd like to say them. Sure. Hi, Tim. Sure, of course. The question was, what is the medical profession doing to educate itself better? And one thing I can tell you is that we're trying to get physicians who are in recovery to speak to their colleagues about this, because it's really hard to, physicians are very data-driven and outcome-based, and want to see scientific evidence for the efficacy, which is basically meaning whether things work or they don't work. They're very evidence-based. All the best practices, whether you have diabetes or high blood pressure or any you have allergies, all the treatments that you're given are theoretically evidence-based, that there's scientific data that shows that it works. And AA is not a research organization, but all of you are testimony that it works. And it's very, very hard to get physicians' attention unless you're able to demonstrate through data and numbers and in a very scientific way that things actually do work. And the IAAA, that International Organization for Alcoholic Physicians, they have actually done some really cool work because they do surveys among themselves to show that, the length and the duration and the frequency of their alcoholism and what they were doing before they got into AA and then what's happened after AA. So using data from themselves and having physicians, if there are any of you who are here, like a physician or a nurse, speaking to physician groups, like at district medical societies and at hospital grand rounds, that brings that to attention. Also, some kind of interesting things have happened. Strangely, it never has happened around alcoholism, but around opioid abuse, the use of OxyContin and drugs like that. And I know there's a singularness of purpose here around alcohol, but I just want to give you an example that recently in Massachusetts, just in February 1st, a law was passed saying that every physician needs to have education about the prescribing of opioids, painkillers, because there's such wide-scale abuse and, diversion of them, people being prescribed them and selling them, and it's kind of skyrocketed. It's gone up like in the last 7 years, like 400% the amount of abuse that's taken place. So the last thing I would want to see is the legislators saying that docs have to learn about alcoholism, but I would love for us to take the lead in that and say, look, instead of having the legislative people tell us what we need to do, let's us have that as a requirement. So every time we need to be relicensed, we would have to learn more about this. I hope that's not too long-winded, but and thanks for your service in terms of doing that with the med students. So they believe it or not, they will never forget you. Just like I never forgot that woman who was at that second-year lecture that I went to. Yes, hi. Hi, Debbie.
My question is, does alcohol the AMA consider alcoholism as a disease?
Yes.
Being a physician, the service take that as a disease and treat that as something over disease and treat it. And I always thought when you were saying when you were putting the idea that they don't take it as like an illness, or that it's a mind-body spiritual element. I thought that would be very much the way you explained it, saying it's a disease.
Right. I think people have a really good understanding of the way that alcohol, basically that molecule is a vicious molecule and it affects every organ system in the body. Every organ system, not only your brain, but every single organ system. And I think people understand, appreciate that, and kind of get excited about that. The issue is, though, there's no pill, there's no shot, there's no, how can I say it, traditional type of way that physicians are taught to treat something. The treatment here is very, very different. It's what you're doing right now. Yes, there is a solution, but it's very, very different, and it's just, what other, I always think, like, what other disease or disorder is there where if you stop doing something, you're immediately cured? Where you just stop doing something, and all of a sudden, like, you're going to be able to be on the path to recovery and get better. And it's very, very unique. But I think it's just really hard. And I think also the remitting, relapsing nature of alcoholism, that people have to really work and try hard, and every day, every hour, every minute, requires work, energy, support. I think that also, quite frankly, is very difficult for physicians who are very immediate oriented. Like you do this and you get that result, and boom, next. The average time that a doc spends with a patient now is guess how long? A primary care doc. Very close, 12 minutes. Guess how long it takes before a patient is interrupted when you go to see your doc and you sit down. Guess how long it takes? Very close. 19 and a half seconds before a doc will interrupt you and start going down the list of things. And what you're involved in takes time, it takes commitment, it takes energy, camaraderie, and mutual support, which is also not something in medicine that people are really, really comfortable with. Sure, we have time for just two more, if I could. Thanks. Terrific. Yeah, thanks. Sure. Just one more. I'm sorry. I feel I've co-opted some of your precious time here. Yes. One of the local meetings that can say from my experience in only one, some people come in to the meeting once in a while to the nurses. Is there any standard requirement in residency programs for medical programs to have people go to It varies by school. Some are encouraged. I know most psychiatric training programs, residency training programs, and fellowships do require that. They do require that. Well, thank you again. It's been such a privilege for me. And again, thanks to Arissa for making all this happen.
Thank you, Dr. Fromson. And now, once again, Bob D. from Las Vegas, Nevada.
My name is Bob Darrell, and I am alcoholic. Thank you, Doc. Where'd you go? Oh, well, thank you. In chapter 5, it says that there's 3 pertinent ideas that are to be gleaned from the doctor's opinion and the first 60 pages of the big book, plus our personal experiences, our adventures before and after. 3 pertinent ideas. First, A, that I am alcoholic and cannot manage my own life, period. Period. I thought it said, and could not manage my own life when drinking. Could not manage my own life, period. And I'm an alcoholic. I'm not a special kind of alcoholic. I'm not a manic depressive alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic with deep hidden issues. I'm not an alcoholic with anxiety disorder. I'm an alcoholic. And yet I've been diagnosed as all those things. I've got all kinds of things. But I have a disease called alcoholism that often mimics other types of mental and emotional disorders. I think everyone in this room on a bad spiritual hair day, if you were to be genuine in front of a therapist, you'd get a diagnosis of something. Alcoholism mimics a lot of different things in this disease of obsessive self-consumption. And it's odd. I just realized this a few years ago. And I think it's also a disease that a hypochondriac rarely imagines he ever has. I mean, a hypochondriac will have everything else, but you don't see hypochondriacs going around going, my God, I got alcoholism and miss, when they don't. I mean, I've never heard of that. But as an alcoholic, I've imagined I've had brain tumors. When you get a headache, you can feel it growing, just all kinds of things. But I have a disease called alcoholism. And I can't manage my own life. Who has ever tried harder? Who has ever tried harder to, as the books say, to be a victim of this delusion that we can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if you only manage well? Who has ever tried harder? Who's ever spent more money, more obsessive focus and energy on making themselves satisfied and happy as we have? And what's the end result? Would you sponsor me? I mean, it's just... B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Oh my God, I tried. I tried everything. My mother was a therapist with mental health and mental retardation in Pennsylvania. My father was very well respected. He made several governors look really good in Pennsylvania. He was the founder, and he started and administrated a big department for the whole state of Pennsylvania. It was very important, cutting-edge stuff. He was very politically connected, and my mother, because she worked in the industry of therapy, got me in to see the absolute top therapists and psychiatrists on the planet at that time. I was in therapy with one guy, two guys actually, that you couldn't get in to see them. You had to be a movie star or a senator or something to get into therapy with these guys, and I was in therapy with them. No success. Even though I would have these psychological and emotional breakthroughs that were almost like an epiphany that would change my life for 2 weeks. I tried everything. And Alcoholics Anonymous didn't look like it had enough substance for me. Isn't it odd? If you are on the front lines and you talk to alcoholics that are just getting sober in hospitals or jails, I've talked to thousands over the years. And I have never met one yet to this day who ever hit bottom in the middle of that just wreckage, just burnt your life to the ground, that hopeless remorse and depression and all that stuff. Whoever looked at the 12 steps and went, oh yeah, that would work. No, I've not met anybody. I met some Al-Anons that go, yeah, it'll work for him, but I've never met an alcoholic because it doesn't look like it will match up and relate to your particular problems until we do it. I don't think any of us know the steps work until after we're in the game a while. And then we all go, oh my God, I should have done this years ago. We all say that. Probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And that means meetings, too. That means you're sponsored. That means all this stuff. I have many years ago, I was on a weekend deal kind of like this with two other guys, and we each had one of the three legacies to talk about. And one of the other guys was a very dear friend of mine, a guy named Tom I from North Carolina. If you've never heard Tom I, he has a remarkable story. Tom just turned 55 years sober. Tom's story is unique in the fact that he got sober as an inmate in a correctional facility. And to date, I believe he is the first convict that ever became a warden through Alcoholics Anonymous, and then became administrator for a prison system for a state and initiated prison reform that is in place throughout many states in this country to this day. And Tom was sharing an experience that affected me. He said he was at a weekend conference, and it was not an AA conference, it was a professional conference for people who worked in the helping fields. And there was a lot of psychiatrists, there were doctors, there was he was there as an administrator who had initiated alcoholism and drug reform within the prison system. And he was on a panel about this kind of thing. And he said there was a psychiatrist who'd gotten up and spoke before him. And the psychiatrist said something that disturbed him. Now, he was not there as an AA member. He was there as a professional, and without the intention of even mentioning that he was an AA. He was going to talk about professional stuff. And the guy before him, the psychiatrist, said, I don't understand. He said, over the years, I know intellectually I need to send these people these alcoholics to Alcoholics Anonymous. And then he said, but lately I'm hesitant to do that. He said, it seems like the people I send to AA get worse. And that got Tom's attention. At the time, Tom was probably a 45-year member of Alcoholics Anonymous and sponsored a plethora of people around the world. A very successful member of AA. Tom got up to the podium after this guy and did something he hadn't intended on doing. He broke his anonymity and he said, I'm a 40-some-year member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said to the psychiatrist and the professionals in the room, I want you to understand that there is AA and then there's something else that's called AA. He said, I'm 45 years sober, and there are meetings, there are groups in Alcoholics Anonymous, if I went to, I would get worse. And he encouraged the professionals to develop what was at one time the roots of our expansion in Alcoholics Anonymous, one-on-one relationships with people in AA. That you need a go-to guy. If you're going to don't just send someone out into the sea of Alcoholics Anonymous because you don't know what they're going to get. You need someone you can count on that is a solid, double-digit, active, sponsoring member of Alcoholics Anonymous that you can say, hey, I got a guy for you. And we kind of grew as a result of relationships. My home group, we try to do this. I've had sat down and taken people to lunch like the public defender, like some of the judges in town. I've had conversations. The people who run the prison system. We try to have relationships. We do it for the same reason that the early members did it, because those people, they need to find alcoholics to help. And these men and women are on the front line. They devoted their life to putting themselves in a position where they have their first contact often with people like me. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous inadvertently through different institutions where they would just realize alcohol was somewhere in the mix in my problem and make me go to AA. I didn't want to go. They made me go. I told this one guy, I was in this place in Pennsylvania. It's middle of winter, got a foot of snow on the ground, and anywhere to live, and I'm in there, and they're making me go to AA, and I protested it. I went to the head guy and said, listen, I know you get government funding, and I think it's against my constitutional rights to be made to go to this pseudo-religion, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, he agreed with me. He said, well, you're probably right. He said, but if you don't go, you're not going to stay here. And there's a foot of snow on the ground, so I can be flexible at times. But professionals really put me in a position where the seed was planted. And this no human power thing has been going on. I tried everything for half dozen years or so. I went to great psychiatrists. I did some great work in therapy. I, with the encouragement of people in the field, became a counselor and worked in the field. And I was very good at it right up to the day I got fired for being drunk on the job. Because I thought that I was under an illusion that knowledge is power, but it's not. I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot over the last 3 decades or so, and I saw something over in Russia a while ago that really affected me. I was over there. It was the 20th anniversary of AA in Russia, which AA didn't start there when it started. It started many years after it started here. And I had a weekend thing going on, and everything had to be through an interpreter. Out of 150 to 180 people in the room, there was only 2 people that could speak and understand English. So we used an interpreter. It's not for me, I hope. We're using an interpreter And this guy comes up to me at one of the breaks, very excited, and he wants to talk to me. And they have the interpreter there, and he's talking really excited to this interpreter, and the interpreter is explaining it to me. And it was something along the lines of, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviets, Russia had such a bad alcoholism problem, and does to this day. You'll see people sitting on the curb with a bottle of vodka at 8 a.m. You'll see them laying on the streets at 8 a.m. Bad alcoholism problem. And it almost made the society partially dysfunctional. And they came up with so many things. They spent millions and millions of dollars trying to fix this problem. I brought home posters that they published, and they would put out all over town and stuff that was trying to curtail the alcoholism problem. One of them is very funny. It's in Russian, but you can tell you what it says. There's a guy who's drunk on his table. He's drooled on himself, and he's passed out on a table with a bottle of vodka. And in the background, there are these two pigs that are covered with slime, and they have a conversation. The one pig saying to the other in Russian, but it really says, "Isn't that guy disgusting?" So they had all kinds of things. They had big rallies where they'd give out these pins that said, I brought a box of them back, that said fighters for soldiers or fighters for sobriety or something like that. They tried to rally people with some kind of enthusiasm. And nothing worked. And they tried everything. And one of the last things, and this guy's trying to explain this part to me. He said one of the last things that the Soviets did was that their scientists developed a chip. And if you were a chronic relapser, they would surgically implant this chip into the middle of the muscle tissue in your back. And if you drank, the chip would detect it, and it would release this toxic poison into your bloodstream. And it was, I guess, from what he said, and I met a guy from Russia later who told me that he had experience with his brother, had the chip also, that it was like a super antabuse. And sometimes it would actually kill someone, but not always, but sometimes it just make you so sick for 2 days you wished you were dead. And as he's saying that, he turns around and he lifts his shirt up, and he's got this ugly, hideous scar in the middle of his back. And then the interpreter says that after over a year of abstinence, he couldn't take it anymore, and he begged his best friend to take a kitchen knife and cut the chip out of him so he could go get some relief. Now, no human power. And, that sounds crazy. Some of you are wincing when you say it. Hey, listen, let me tell you something. I can picture myself after a year of depression, loneliness, restless, irritable discontent, the anxiety and self-consumption of just having me on me, and I can't get me off of me. Cut the frickin' chip out of me, would you? I understand that. I mean, it's hideous, but I get it. No human power could relieve our alcoholism. My God, who's ever tried more? We have family members that make themselves sick, that bankrupt themselves trying to help us. No human power. Now, the crazy thing about that is that we live in a world where there's people that look like alcoholics, that have a terrible, abusive nature with alcoholism. And they can just get sober, make up their mind, with a little support from the family, never drink again. But I have not been dealt that hand. I am the guy the big book was written for. I am the guy that is beyond human aid. I am the chronic alcoholic. I am not the acute alcoholic. And see that God would if he were sought. Well, the next word says being convinced. I think that we were at step 3. I think most of us get to step 3 and we're only convinced of A and B. I mean, how could you possibly be convinced yet that God could and would? Because you haven't really sought him yet. You haven't worked the steps. You haven't really done the rest of the process. I think we really become convinced that God could, would, and did after we sought him for a while. But we take an act of faith. There's one of my favorite lines in the book is that there's a solution. It says, before you ever come to believe in God, before you ever come to believe that AA might even work for you, it says we came to believe in the hopelessness and futility of our life as we'd been living it. And it says, so therefore, when we are approached by those whom the problem had been solved, see, I see you. I see you, I hear you, I'm identifying. I'm like you, and yet something's happened to you. It was undeniable. I could make these connections. I could hear people talk about things, their suicide attempts, their emotions, their thoughts, things that, my God, were so secret to me. And I'm making this connection, and I'm like you, and yet something has happened to you. It was undeniable. Something has changed you, transformed you. And so the book says we get to a place where there's nothing left. We have to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools that some of us have had laid at our feet for years, and we jump over them on our way to get what we want. AA, I need a job. AA, her. AA, medication, pills, yeah. We jump over, bypass the answer. Isn't it odd that a guy like me could sit in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous several times a week for years, almost as if like a starving man at a banquet. Everybody around me is getting better, and then there's me. If you've ever had that feeling, it's a sick, hideous feeling, sitting in the middle of an AA meeting, feeling like it's all of you, and then there's me. So, being convinced, we were at step 3. On page 55 of the book, and I want to touch on a couple things here. There's 2 paragraphs in the middle of the page that are remarkable. It's a vision of exactly what I will find in steps 4 through 9. Matter of fact, it's so remarkable. It tells you point blank when, where, and how you're going to access the power, this thing that a lot of people call God. It's very bold. You know, I've read a lot of. I've fascinated maybe 20 years ago. Started reading a lot of things about alcoholism and different attempts, and I think that AA may very well be the first thing that's ever happened on this planet that has done something that needed to be done but could never be done. Alcoholics, and William James sort of got this, and Carl Jung got this. He really got this. And the early members of AA got this, is that there's something not quite right with us. The answer is God, but we're messed up in that area. We can't access and maintain. Even if we access it, it fades so quickly with us. I mean, how many of us get born again, have epiphany experiences, and then drink again? James's book is full of it. That there's something that we are so self-consumed that we block God out easily, even though we may have a momentary epiphany and connect. Oh my God, some of us have had moments where we need a tambourine. And then we just fade right back into ourselves again. And God just... And we don't know it. We don't know it. That is the hideous thing about this disease. Is it exists in our mind, and you don't know that you start getting sick, and you don't know you're getting sick. Matter of fact, the sicker some guys like me, and I've had some of this experience. The sicker I get, the more I prop myself up with spiritual ideas to tell myself I'm not sick. Look at Jim Jones. Jim Jones was one of us. You can go. I've had conversations in Oakland, California, with people who remember his ministry on the streets there and the good he did. And he was one of us who had a born again experience, a conversion experience. He had a calling into the ministry to serve God. He was, I believe, he was amazingly connected for a period of time. But he had no one to judge and base his vision of God's will on except his own mind, the mind of a regressive into self chronic alcoholic. And Jim got sicker incrementally, slowly. His frog was getting cooked. He didn't know it. And the sicker he got, the more self-righteous in his religious beliefs he became. And the tragic thing, I have a friend who lives in Maui now, is 20-some years sober, who was one of the few survivors of Jonestown. The tragic thing is that Jim Jones and all his followers, they all killed themselves believing they were doing God's will. Now that is bizarre. You don't go from the guy who's connected to God, serving God's kids, to that overnight. That is a slow inundation of self-centered fear, and it's just, it will drive you. We literally cook ourselves insane on our own juices. When you think about it objectively, if you're a person, if you're not an idiot, and you've relapsed several times, and you get it, my God, the picking up a drink is the absolute worst thing. My freedom's at stake, my family's at stake, my career's at stake, my mental health is at stake. And you've made up your mind not to drink, and you really mean it. You would have to go insane to pick up a drink, wouldn't you? I mean, that's crazier. If you had a friend that just intermittently just felt consumed with, just had to stick a sharp stick in his eye a couple times, you'd want to lock the guy up. You'd think this guy's nuts. Well, I went on some runs that might have been kinder if I'd have just stubbed a sharp stick in my eye than what I did to my mother and father. What I did to some of the people who loved and trusted me. But I'm too self-centered to see that. I never looked at me the way you looked at me. My God, if I could have saw me through my mother and father's eyes, I'd have hung myself. So no human power could relieve our alcoholism. In page 55, it starts talking about what we're going to find here. And it's a remarkable part of the book. It starts off, and this is coming out of the section where it talks about all our doubts, all our prejudices. We alcoholics have an unbelievable resistance to God. And you think that, and that's true of alcoholic clergy, who have a tremendous intellectual deal about God, and yet there's a resistance in them to connecting with God. They pump themselves up with knowledge, but no conscious contact. There's no reality in their relationship with God. It's all up here. It's all cognizant. And the ego gets behind that with a lot of self-righteousness and fervor. So it says, actually, we were fooling ourselves. For deep down, in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. Deep down in me, I remember I used to hear old-timers say that all the time. My grand sponsor, Chuck Chamberlain, he used to talk about that. And I remember one time I was standing in the line after he talked at our intergroup to thank him. And a couple people in front of me in the line had questions for him. And the one guy asked Chuck, he says, well, where do you find God? And Chuck had this funny little laugh, and he laughed that funny little laugh, and he pointed at the guy's chest. He said, he's not lost, he's right in there. I used to hear the old-timers talk about listening to the still, small voice of God within and getting direction from that. There was a gal that I went to meetings with at one of the AA groups in town named Diantha. Diantha was a very spiritual woman, just one of those, like a little Buddha that would just sit there. She's just, very cool, very cool. She was a knitter. She'd just sit and smile and knit. And me and another knucklehead newcomer realized that if you used the F word, she'd knit a little faster. So we went on a little thing to see if we could make sparks come out of her needles, Ugh, we were idiots. But one day I was listening to her because she was, when you hear something right, it resonates within you, even though your head may not like it. And every time Diantha would share, something would happen in here. And one day she's talking about her relationship with God. And she said, I really look forward and enjoy every day alone time with God in quiet solitude. She said, I like to just sit alone, no stereo, no TV, no disturbances, and just commune with God. And the way she said it seemed very attractive to me. And I remember sitting there going, yeah, I'm going to go home and I'm going to commune with God. And I hadn't really worked the steps yet, and we don't recommend this if you're new. So I went home and I'm going to get quiet and commune with God. No TV, no stereo, just me and God. And what I discovered is when it gets quiet out here, it gets very noisy in here. And about 30 seconds, I'm having an anxiety attack. I have to turn the TV on because I go inside me and I don't find God. I find Legion. I find a pack of crazy people just chattering at me all the time. But I hadn't cleared out enough of me yet to access God. See, I am so consumed with myself, I go inside and all I see is me. I just run into me. And the book says that. That's the reason when I go inside me, I don't access God. It says because this thing that's deep down within me is obscured, which means blocked. And it's obscured by three things. The first thing, and oddly enough, these are the three things that we will uncover, discover, and discard. And we attack them all from the flank, not head on, through steps 4 through 9. And these are the manifestations of self that are blocking me, that are obscuring me from God. The first one is calamity. There's something about me. I've kind of gravitated to calamity. There's something about me that likes things that just kind of stir you up. If I go to an amusement park and they got a merry-go-round and a roller coaster that'll make you want to scream and think you're going to die, I may not even notice the merry-go-round. I'll see that roller coaster from the parking lot. You know what I mean? It's like, and I could go into a thing about relationships. You put me in a room with 20 women, I'll get the drink with 2 legs every single time. It's like if it's going to make me nuts and crazy and right out on the edge, sign me up. I'm there. I've been that way all my life. I don't like going over the edge, but I think I like the view from the edge. I just like to get right out there, know you're alive. You maybe feel like later like you want to die, but I like it right out there. And I've gravitated to that all my life. I like getting, I used to get myself, my first 8-10 years of sobriety, I'd get so many balls in the air with my company. I ran a big company. I had all kinds of projects in the community. I'm building buildings. I'm running this store. I'm managing these. I just get so much stuff going. I remember one time I said to my sponsor, I said, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I got all this stuff. It's more than I can handle. And he says, well, how did it get like that? I said, well, God. He said, really? He said, can I see your appointment book? I want to see where God wrote that stuff in there. And it was me. I gravitated toward it. I liked it more and more and more and more and more and more. And so consequently, there is no peace within me. And that I love that line. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." The problem is there's not much conscious contact when you're spinning. When you're spinning, I have to be still. If you wanted to know what calamity sounded like, why you can't hear God within you, imagine that on a bad day, a surgeon could surgically implant a microphone into your brain, hooked up to loudspeakers, and we get to hear everything you think throughout that day. We would hear calamity. We'd hear legion. We'd hear insanity. So is it any wonder that if God really is deep down within me, even if he had a megaphone, I'm not going to hear him over the clamoring in my own head? A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with this woman she was very astute, a biblical scholar, and she had read the Bible and studied the Bible in the original language that it was written in. And she told me something that I had never heard before. It was remarkable. It has affected me since. She said if you went back into Genesis and you read it in the original language, when you got to the part where it talks about the serpent in the Garden of Eden, she said the word they used wouldn't have been translated literally as the word serpent into the English language. She said the word they used actually was not the word for the serpent, it was the word for the sound the serpent made. It was the hiss and the slither. You can't see it, but you can hear it circling you through the tall grass. It just chatters at you. It's just there. It's hissing at you all the time. It never goes away. It's just always there. It's saying things like, what does your sponsor know? They're old. I said, the 55 mile an hour speed limit is good, but I'm in a hurry. It's for those people. The rules are for those people. It says crazy. It says like, what's the guy doing with his hand next to his head? It just chatters all the time. A great example, if you've ever seen the second Lord of the Rings movie, there's a scene in there where King Theoden is in the spell of this evil force, Shaman or whatever, and his minion is a guy named Wormtongue, who's the counselor to the king, and Wormtongue sits next to the king and just whispers in his ear all the time, don't trust these people. This is going to be bad. I got that. I wake up in the morning sometimes and it says to me, there's some crap going to happen today. You better be on high alert. What do they mean by that? Oh, they're thinking something about you. I can tell. I know it. That boss never really did like you, did he? You might as well just quit. It just tells it. It just says stuff like that to me all the time. And it blocks me. It's one of the three things that blocks me from God. The other thing is pomp. Pomp's a good word for ego. Is I just fill up with myself. With my ideas, with it's just me. It's all me. I'm the guy that when I quit drinking, I just get myself on myself like that creature in that movie Alien that just attaches itself to your face. I'm so full of me and wrapped up with me and what I think is right and my ideas and my way. And don't interfere with my way. Don't question my way. Don't restrain me. And I'm just full of pomp. And I'm a guy that nothing new ever can get in here. I'm too full of me. God can't get in. You can't get in. My sponsor can't get in. I'm totally self-consumed. I'm blocked. And then the third thing is worship of other things. And this is an odd deal because I didn't know what worship meant. I thought it meant to bow down to something or some crazy thing like you see in the movies, you know. And you could have put me on a lie detector when I was a year sober. and said, Bob, now that you're sober, do you worship anything? I would have said, absolutely not. I may have been able to concede that when I was in the grip of my obsession with alcohol, that I may have, in a bizarre sense, worshipped that, I suppose. But I'm sober. I don't worship anything. And I worshipped a lot, and I didn't know it because I didn't know what that meant. And I was a little over a year sober, and I was ending my first sober relationship. Now, over the last 30-some years, I've sponsored a lot of guys that have had relationship problems. And guys in Massachusetts probably don't have relationship problems. We have a lot of relationship problems in Las Vegas. And I got to tell you something. I don't think there's a person on the planet more self-obsessed than an alcoholic ending a relationship. Oh, my God. You can walk up to a guy like that and just go, oh, I just came from the doctor. I have terminal cancer and 2 weeks to live. And he'll go, do you know what else she said? I mean, it's like smeared all over the windshield of your car. You can't see nothing else. It's consuming. And I'm like that. And it hurts. It feels awful, like I've been gut shot, like there's a wind blowing through the pit of my stomach and my head's going a million miles an hour. I go to a meeting just hoping to get some relief. I can't get it off me. I can't stop thinking about it. And I go to this meeting and I can't hear anything in the meeting. When you're spiritually sick, what that really means is you're so consumed with yourself that what's happening in the real world and in life itself becomes distant, like music in the doctor's office, the meetings like the chatter. God could be trying to talk to me through the people in that meeting, and it's just so far away because the big show is on the inside. And I'm up in my head and I'm having conversations with her that when I see her, I'm going to tell her this. And then she's probably going to say that. And then I'm going to hit her with this. And then that's going to make her say that. And when she says that, now I'm going to hit her with this. And she'll realize how wrong she'd been, be properly ashamed of herself, and ask for me to come back. Right? So I'm not hearing too much in the meeting. Oh, and she's a member of AA, and she's not in that particular meeting, which means that some hideous force has implanted a bungee cord in the back of my neck connected to the meeting room door. Every time the door opens, I go, oh, not her. Oh, not her. Oh, not her. Oh, not her. Right? So by the end of the meeting, I'm nuts. This meeting has not helped me. Plus, the subject is gratitude, which is not a good subject for me. And, what is this about? Every once in a while, it seems like God just puts on the bozo, the clown nose, and just wants to screw with Bob. What is it that you're ending a relationship, and all of a sudden, every meeting you go to is full of happy couples? What is that about? I get in that meeting, I look around, everybody's in love, 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 love. I want to take a machine gun and just... So by the end of the meeting, I am not doing any better. I'm actually worse. This was a late night meeting at 10:15 up on the Strip at a little chapel. There was a lot of visitors from out of town there, and we used to give them rides back to their hotels. And there was a visitor from Glendale, California, sober a long time, and longer than my sponsor. He wanted to ride back to his hotel, and I said, absolutely. And I said, do you mind if we stop at the coffee shop? A lot of people in AA go there after the meeting. He said, yeah, that's fine. I get him in my car, and I get him into a booth in the coffee shop. I kind of have him hostage. I start telling him about this relationship for 20 or 30 minutes till his eyes have glazed over. And he's a very, very kind man. He sits there and listens and nods his head. And when I ran out of gas, he said some things to me that just shook me to the core. He said, kid, have you ever thought about the First Commandment? Well, even though I'm sober over a year, I still have some remnants of the prejudices from my childhood, right? When he said that, I said, I'm not really into that. I'm just into AA. And he starts laughing. He says, yeah. He says, I don't. He says, you and I are a lot alike. He says, guys like us have an awful hard time getting past the thou shalt not, don't we? He said, but the 10 Commandments, he said, in my experience, were originally written as statements of spiritual cause and effect. And as they were translated through various languages, there was an authoritarian spin put on them by some well-intentioned people. He said, as it exists in the English today, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not put false gods before me. He said, it's my experience that God loves you, period. He loves you no matter what. He's given you free will. You can put anything you want between you and God. He'll still love you. The problem is you just put something between you and God. You just block the light. He said, when you worship something, it doesn't mean to bow down to it. It means to obsessively turn your consciousness towards. He said, it's easy to figure out what you worship. At the end of your day, make a pie graph of everything you've been thinking about, and the thing that would dominate the pie graph would obviously be the thing you're obsessively turning your consciousness towards. And when he said that, I could picture in my mind this pie graph. A little sliver for work, a little sliver for AA, and almost the whole pie was the relationship. And I understood why I was in such painful desolation. Why I seemed to be cut off from God, from the people in AA, and from life itself. Why I seemed to be a prisoner of my own emotions and my own thoughts. Because I put this thing between me and my very life. And it was consuming me. Now, I wish you, that was 30-some years ago. I wish I could tell you. I've never done that since. But I've done it a bunch. And I've done it with various things. I've done it with a resentment that I couldn't let go of until I'm proven right. I've done it with money. I've done it with relationships. I've done it with my daughter. I've done it with all kinds of things. And what do I do it with? Isn't everything that I've ever done that with contain within it an illusion of power? What's a relationship bring people who are new and vacant and incomplete and lost? It gives you an illusion that if you had your other half, maybe I'll be whole. It gives you an illusion with the right person loving me the right way. Surely then I will have wrested some satisfaction and some happiness out of this world. With the right person loving me the right way, surely at that point I will feel validated and complete. The problem is, if there is one who has all power, then there is no power in the relationship. It's an illusion. You know how we know that? Because some of us, we get the person we want, and now we don't know what to do with them. Right? It's like, now what? We get the job. We get the 6 or 7 figure a year job that we always believed would make the difference. And we're still as screwed up as we were before we had the job. Now that the ego pump is worn off. My sponsor's sponsor used to say, he said something one time. I'll tell you, the first time he said it almost knocked me off the chair. He said, if you're sober and you're separate from God, he said, there'll come a time, and this is really the way untreated alcoholism is. He said, there'll come a time when you can no longer find anything that you can put between you, and there you are. And there you are. And that is a desolate place. That is the place of desolation that some of us drink again. That is the place of desolation that some very dear men and women take their own lives. No human power. We've tried it all. We've tried it all. What do you do? You know, my home group took a meeting years ago into a very, very high bottom treatment center. in Las Vegas. And this place catered to movie stars and rock stars and sports guys. And they had a contract with the National Hockey League and Universal Studios, all these places. It was $1,500 a day, 30 days in advance, cash, no insurance, up front, just to get in the door. And then they build you from there on. I mean, and there's not a lot of alcoholics that have like that kind of a savings account for detox. I mean, there's just not. So the real high bottom people, we were asked to bring a meeting in there, and me and some of the guys I sponsor started taking a meeting in there, and we're all doing very well materially, but it's pathetic. But we have a little bit of low bottom snobbery. You know what I mean? How alcoholic can you be with your own Gulfstream? That kind of a low bottom snobbery, but which is silly because alcoholism has nothing to do with any of that. And we went in there, and to our amazement, we discovered something. We were talking to one of the psychiatrists that worked there. And in this place that serves the newcomers lobsters, and they have massages and stuff, and it was like, stop it. Anyway, that's my low bottom snobbery leaking out again. And the psychiatrist said something very interesting. He said, of all the demographics of alcoholism, the one with the highest successful suicide rate is the mega wealthy. And I thought about that, and I thought, my God, that makes perfect sense. What do you do? What do you do when there's nothing left to buy? What do you do when you have a house everywhere you want to have a house, and you have your own jet airplane, and you have a fleet, you have 20 cars, and you have everything you've ever wanted, and there's not even anything more to focus on. There's nothing left to target, and you're still you. You would think that the abundance would make the vacancy and the desolation smaller, but I think it makes it larger in stark relief against the background of what should be a good life. And it makes my vacancy stand out in more painful relief. That's why, isn't it odd that most alcoholics, that when we drink again or commit suicide, we do it at a time when materially our life is better than it had ever been? Isn't that crazy? You'd think you'd do it at a low point. And there are people in desperation that have lost a marriage or something like that, and they do go on south on us at that time. But an awful lot of us do it. My friend Frank, with 23 and a half years sober, when he committed suicide, he had a perfectly restored first year they ever made Corvette. He had a custom Harley that was beautiful. He had a custom truck, candy apple red. It was beautiful. Had a big house. He had a wife that was an ex-model. He was making deep six figures every year. Frank had arrived. When he got sober, he had nothing. Everything he owned was in a paper bag as he got out of the institution. He killed himself at a moment when his life was materially better than it had ever been. But nothing had changed in here. And as the backdrop of his life got more abundant, his vacancy got more pronounced. Isn't that crazy? It's crazy. And this delusion that that all this stuff, and so many of us come into AA and we work on the outsides, hoping that if we get the outsides right, the insides will change, and it never works that way. AA, we say, leave yourself alone. Go help people, make amends, develop a relationship with God. Work on the inside, the very core of your spirit, and let's see what happens. The book goes on to say, so the reason I can't connect with God, or if I do connect, it fades so quickly, is that my connection with God will always be inclined to be obscured by calamity. I fill up with myself until there's just too much chatter. Pomp is me, full of me and my ideas and my self-righteousness and what I think is right, and worship of other things. This obsessive nature to focus obsessively on things I think are going to make a difference in my life. And it says, but even considering all of that, it said faith and a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. That's really true. You can go back through history, and every single culture on the planet from the beginning of time, there's been something in the human heart that knows. They describe it, they tell stories about it, they dress it up, and thus 100 religions were formed as a result of men trying to intellectualize something that happens that in here you know, but you can't prove. And it's experiential. And from the beginning of time, men have had experiences of connecting momentarily with this power. You know it's there. And then it fades. You spend the rest of your life seeking it again. It's there. It's as old as man himself. One of the most powerful things about AA is that it doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what culture you came from. We got something, it's like spiritual physics. We can absolutely promise you, if you take these actions, there's some stuff going to happen to you. Now, what you're going to call it and how you're going to try to explain it to yourself is you're going to be your deal. But something's going to happen to you. Something's going to wake up inside you. And the book refers to it at one point as a hidden inner resource. It's amazing. Amazing. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. Where else does it say, use those two words in the same line, searching, fearless, moral inventory? Isn't it odd that we move closer to God by searching out the things in ourselves that are corrupt? It's almost like I'm looking for God and I'm looking for a diamond in the bottom of a dung heap. It's odd that in the big book there's promises through or effects of the actions throughout the whole book. It's not after step 3 that we're promised a nearness to our Creator, that we will begin to have had a spiritual experience. It's after step 5. Frank Buckman, who was the founder of the Oxford group, he believed that you might not even, don't even try to access God until you first clear enough of you out of the way. That was the foundation of moral rearmament, which later became known as the Oxford group. But the problem is that we're blocked from God. So we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. And I love this line. We found the great reality. What a great word for God. The great reality. God's more of now than I am. If you want to be in the presence, you got to be in the present. And most alcoholics don't live in the present. It tells you in the book where you'll find God, in that place that most of us never go. There's one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him in that place most of us seldom visit now. We're not now people. We're thinkers. We're deep thinkers. As a matter of fact, some of you, as I'm saying that, are thinking, what page is that on? I can't wait to tell Joe about that. We're not present people. That's why we don't even live in our own lives. We live in the story of our lives. You think you want to have an interesting experience? If you have any non-alcoholic, mentally adjusted, emotionally stable siblings, have a conversation with them about the household you grew up in, and you will think that they grew up in a different house than you did. Their perception of it will be so different. And with your track record, I think theirs might be more accurate. The ego says, no, it's not. I had a conversation with my sister. She's telling us stuff. I wanted to argue with her, and I was just cocked and ready to explain to her how wrong she was. And the thought came into me, listen, Bob, with your track record here, your sister's pretty well adjusted. Who do you think's perception might be wrong? And my ego hated it. My ego's going, no, I remember it's like that. But I can tell myself a story for a couple decades that isn't even true, and it becomes true. I had this experience a little while ago. I was telling some people something that happened to me when I was a kid, and in the middle of telling it, it was all of a sudden, it was like the veil lifted, and I went, oh, that didn't even happen. I've been telling that story for 35 years. I never was part of that motorcycle again. That never happened. But I told it so many times, I believed it. And there was a little kernel of sort of halfway almost reality in there. I actually knew some of those guys, but I wasn't that was none of that. I told that story for so long, I believed it. I had memories of it. I created I created memories of it. It was unbelievable. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. After we look everywhere else. I think that what happens to some of us is I did this for a number of years here. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm not looking for God, and I'm not looking to change. I'm looking for relief. I'm obsessed with relief. I found you go to a lot of meetings, you get some relief. I went to a lot of meetings. Sponsor people, you get a little relief. I sponsored a lot of guys. Do service, you get a little relief. I'm looking everywhere else. I spent the first 4 years of my sobriety going to 15, 20 meetings a week. I was at DCM. I was on 2 convention committees. I had 2 hospital and institution commitments per week. I went on 12-step calls. I mean, there was nothing in Alcoholics Anonymous, an activity that I wasn't doing. As if I could outrun my alcoholism. That it took 4 years, and it's breathing down my neck. It's coming at me. And I'd done some stabs at the steps. When I was about a year sober, I wrote my life story out, which means nothing. Didn't change nothing in me. And I was honest. I put down my secret slimy stuff. I was honest, but it didn't change nothing. At 3 years sober, I did another 4th step using the 12 steps and 12 traditions, 4th chapter. I answered the 30-some questions and wrote about close to a page on each of the 7 deadly sins. Changed nothing. It wasn't until I did the 4th step. I was over 4 years sober when I actually started really going into the steps as they're outlined in the book. Why would it do that? Why would I do that? I don't follow directions well. Smart guys don't need to. Did you ever buy something that has directions you do assemble? We don't. I'll start assembling it without the directions I wait till it's a mess, and then I'll be looking for the directions, right? And I did that in my own life. I 4.5 years, a little over 4 years sober. My life is a mess. In 4 years, I went through 9 jobs. 9 jobs. That speaks volumes of untreated alcoholism right there. 9 jobs. I couldn't work long enough to get insurance or a vacation. I can't. I'm averaging a job every 6 months. 9 jobs in 4 years. Relationships, disaster area. Depression. Depression has a hard time catching a moving target. And it was catching me. And eventually it will. And I was trying to outrun it. And it's the depression of the obsessively self-consumed. And at 4 years sober, I started the journey. And the last analysis, isn't that odd? And here's the bizarre thing. I go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous twice a day, average, and they read something twice a day, and I don't hear it. And every meeting I go to, and these are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program recovery. I wonder if she'd go out with me. These are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program recovery. I need a Harley. These are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program recovery. I got to get in a band. These are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program recovery. I think I'll stand for delegate. These are the steps we took, which are suggested as a programmer. I need more sponsees. I'm looking everywhere else for relief when I don't really need relief. I need God. And that in and of itself is a great change for me, to push myself aside. In the last analysis, it is only there that he can be found. It was so with us. Let's take a break. Come back in about 15 minutes.